Hello, everyone. I'm Janet Salmons, Research Community Manager for Sage Methodspace, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Joseph Esposito, and we're going to have a conversation about AI and scholarly publishing, building on this article he recently wrote for the Scholarly Kitchen. But before we get started, if you are new to Methodspace, this is a blog that is sponsored by Sage Publishing. We're interested in everything to do with designing, planning, conducting research, writing about it, and sharing results in all different kinds of ways. And you can see at the center of this diagram, we have teaching and learning, because we think that whether you are a brand new researcher or a very experienced researcher, we all have something to learn. And that's why I love having this kind of an opportunity to talk with people, because I always learn a lot. So why don't you just begin by briefly introducing yourself?
Hi, my name is Joe Esposito. I'm the senior partner at Clark and Esposito. We are a boutique consulting firm focusing largely in scholarly publishing, also professional publishing. Our clients are disproportionately not-for-profit organizations. They range from universities and academic libraries, any number of professional societies. We also work occasionally with some of the commercial publishers. And very importantly, we work with software companies that service the scholarly publishing industry. The company was founded by my partner, Michael Clark, and myself. We subsequently brought in Pam Harley as our third partner. And we're proceeding nicely in this small little space where we are very, very happy to participate.
Well, the article that you wrote for the Scholarly Kitchen just really sparked my interest, and you connected the dots, or suggested that we need to connect the dots across some areas that I've been thinking about. So naturally, the fact that I saw, someone else was thinking about these things made me quite intrigued. So I'm glad to have this chance to talk with you. So the first point I want to just pull out from the article and talk about a little bit is the point you made, the question you suggested, who owns the cultural content that AIs are hoovering up to build these new machines and new intelligences? So thinking especially for Methodspace readers who are academic researchers and writers, and the implications for our work. What are some of the changes that you see, and any kind of advice that you can give? I guess one of the things that just strikes me is I guess there are a couple of things. One is the implications just for copyright, and whether we need some kind of a new form. We think, like, say, Creative Commons came to be because we needed a new form that would both protect our intellectual property but also allow for sharing. So I'll just throw it back to you, to maybe dig a little bit more into that point.
Yeah. So let me break your question into two parts, and we'll get rid of the first part really quickly. The first part is simply that when I wrote that piece, it was in part basically to say to people, take a deep breath and step back. Everybody's going crazy here. And there's simply nothing that you can't, no topic you can't find someone to attribute all nasty things to artificial intelligence. And who the heck knows what it is and where it's going, right? It's moving at a speed that if you're outside of the field, and I'm certainly outside of the field, I don't know anybody who is inside the field, but the people inside the field who mostly work for commercial tech companies, disproportionately in the United States, they have, some of them have sounded an alarm, and some of them are very, very optimistic about where things are going, and they're also optimistic about our ability to properly regulate these things. So I think that the first thing to say about this is that to the extent that one's heart rate increases when you read an article about artificial intelligence, you're doing it wrong. We should approach this with the same cold and clinical, dispassionate way we do our taxes. That's I think the proper spirit to put it in. The second point, though, is the intellectual property issue. And let me be clear, although we might not find a lot of people who take the point of view that you were thinking about independently, and then you came upon my blog post on this topic. I assure you, there are many, many people who've been thinking about this for some time. They're thinking about it in a commercial context, and in the commercial context, there's simply no benefit for any of the participants for doing this stuff publicly. All good things take place behind closed doors. And the notion that we're going to suddenly democratize important policy issues is anathema to the people who actually have these assets, because they don't want to give their assets away. They're trying to study how their investments can be made into a proper return. Not everybody likes that perspective, but that certainly is the perspective of the people who actually make these investments. The intellectual property issues basically come down to this, and this is a very unsatisfactory comment, and that is that there's no way to navigate this space without the assistance of a very capable intellectual property lawyer. And also, you have to be prepared in talking to these folks to revisit points of view on a regular basis, and I mean monthly. I'm not talking about every 5 years. This is, and that's because it's all fluid. I don't think a lot of people really had given thought to the fact that Google has been hoovering up all this data for years and years and years, and now has found a new economic model to be made from this, without any regard to who created this material in the first place.
Right.
So that's a new idea for a lot of people. The law may or may not have caught up with this. You don't know until it goes through the courts. It is fashionable to say that the law has not kept up with technology. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I really can't say. But what I do know is there is an arrogant disregard for the work of creative people in this community. It is almost astonishing the way people talk about intellectual property in this community as though it somehow falls from the skies and we should all be so thankful it happened to land in my front yard. And that just is an absolute denial of the fact that people work very hard. They get up early, they stay up late, they work weekends and holidays. They run around trying to raise money to build organizations. They go through a long process of investment, of creation, of refinement, of distribution. They revisit these things. It is very, very hard work. And to say that all of this work is of no consequence whatsoever, we are simply a we're $1 trillion tech company. We're going to just take it away from you and then do what we want with it. And furthermore, we'll sell it back to you. Why don't we do that? Why don't we sell it back to you as well? I mean, this is just really, it's silly. And it is a standard, if you want to call it a standard, that is applied, to my knowledge, to no other industry in the country. I mean, nobody goes over to Ben and Jerry's and say, you really should give your ice cream away.
Right.
It's ludicrous. Nobody says a K through 12 school teacher should sit in front of a screaming class of 25 kids every day and not get paid for it. Nobody tells a lawyer, stop charging $500 an hour. All work should be pro bono. But if you are in the intellectual property business, you are actually doing God's work, and God does not expect to have to pay you. I find this really to be utterly revolting as a point of view, and that is where my perspective comes from.
Right.
Here.
Right. And I mean, we could talk all day about, the change in the kind of academic workforce and the decrease in the number of people who have a secure tenured job versus contingent and adjunct faculty, it's harder and harder. And then, to suddenly, have your work absorbed without your permission, consent, there's no way you can say no, you can't take it back. And, when I think about, because in the nature of what I do, I'm an author too, and I write books, as well, and it is a lot of work. But I think about, say, the way that you structure a scholarly article, where you have this very logical sequence of, here's the problem I studied and why it's important. Here's the foundations from the previous literature and the context for this study. Here's how I did it. Here's the basis of my conclusions. To just have it, kind of scrambled, and, some bits of this are going to be thrown in with some bits from Wikipedia and social media posts and, whatever else they gleaned, from across the world. So it's not only the recognition and the any kind of remuneration for your intellectual property, but also, just the risk of it being really just taken apart in ways that you did not intend, that would, allow, inaccurate conclusions to be made. Those things I think are concerning as well, that kind of go along with the intellectual property question, because again, you using the example from Creative Commons, where, you can say, well, okay, you can mix and match with this piece of work as long as you give me credit. But on this piece of work, like, no, you can't mix and match. You can't like take it apart and put it back in another way. I want the integrity of this piece of work to remain, but we don't have any choice with these kinds of questions.
Yes, I do think it's probably useful to bear in mind that publishing is not monolithic. So there's about 100. The book industry, for example, is about $140 billion around the world. But the academic book industry is a tiny fraction of that. Most books, in fact, are published as so-called trade books, really entertainment books. And we know few people with a college education don't buy them from time to time. We read mysteries, we read diet books and cookbooks and travel books, and some of us read serious nonfiction and literary fiction and so forth. But trade books are one category. You then have academic books. The university press community sits at the center of that. They do about 14,000 books a year in the United States. That's the members of the Association for University Presses. That is a major chunk of the intellectual output, especially in the humanities in the world today, a major chunk of that. You then have a $10 billion scholarly publishing business, by which I mean journals, as distinct from books. And that's bigger than the academic book business. And it has, in the consumer world, that has its equivalent in the world of websites and magazines and so forth. I don't know what the numbers are for those consumer publishing publications anymore. But what you have are different kinds of publishing. You have publishing where scholars write for scholars. You have publishing where scholars write for students. You have publishing where scholars write for the layperson. In my opinion, not enough of that, but I'm not in a position to change that with the wave of my hand. You have professional authors who are essentially journalists and entertainment writers and so forth. There's nothing wrong with Stephen King, but we should not confuse Stephen King with the author of a monograph published by the University of Chicago Press. These are just different kinds of things. And the reason to make these distinctions is that the economic issues for the various people in these industries varies very much depending on which segment they're in. Now, you are yourself an academic, and you know the game. And of course, Sage Publishing is very much involved in one component of the game. It's not how much money you make on writing that article. It's how many citations your article gets, and what journal is it published in, and what is the impact factor of that journal, and who is creating citations for your piece, and how many of these pieces can you produce, and so forth. It's a whole numbers game. And that, of course, assists you in the tenure and promotion cycle, helps you get your grants and so forth. That's very different from somebody, the starving artist working in his or her garret, wanting to write the novel that is going to change the way people think about the world, or for that matter, one that'll simply make us all giggle. And nothing wrong with that either, right? I mean, nothing wrong with having fun reading the book. But those are different economic motivations. The publishers of these different kinds of things also have different motivations, and they have different asset bases. Now, I would absolutely love to be the proprietor of all of the books published by Penguin Random House. That's a big collection. They have a lot of great books there. But what I'd really like, what I'd really like, is to have the intellectual property rights to Sage with John Wiley or Elsevier. When you start to think about the 5 or 8 major publishers of scholarly journals, when you start to think about them, you realize you're talking about the intellectual brain trust of the species. This is where the future is being invented. And my point is simply that the people who are inventing the future should be able to get a little bit of a discount on that lot in the future. And that is at this time being denied them because all of their material is being taken away by the likes of Google, Meta, Facebook, Amazon, and so forth. And frankly, those guys don't need the money.
Right. I mean, say, if I write a book, I do get royalties from the sales. For academic writers who write journal articles, there's no pay involved for writing a journal article. And in addition, as you say, to, establishing your credibility in your field, making a contribution, that is what impact means, that it's made a difference. And so it's to me, that's kind of, even more so of an argument in favor of, it's the integrity of that work that is what the author has put out there. And so to, you're not getting, you're not getting recognition, you're not getting any pay, but also the integrity of your work is now kind of, potentially scrambled. To me, those things are very concerning. But it's like, I don't know what we can really do about it. So, one of the things that comes to my mind about these issues and about the protection for our intellectual property in any way that it can be protected is that that's quite, even though the internet's kind of, we think of it as being this, it goes across all borders, but the ways that laws are set, are very different from one part of the world to the next. So, if you live in Europe, where you have the new Digital Services Act and the various kinds of, layers of regulation around privacy, around the ability to the right to be forgotten. You can say, like, I don't want to do this anymore, just pull the plug on all my stuff. And the people in other parts of the world, including the US, don't have those rights. So, I'm wondering what you think as you, look at this as a global circumstance. How should we think about that?
Well, let's distinguish between personal information and copyrighted publications. So most of us think, when we think about these things at all, we think about the personal information. How is it that one day I went online to buy some socks? This is literally true. This is a couple of years ago, went online to buy some socks. And to my astonishment, 2 days later, advertisements for socks showed up on my Facebook page. What's the connection? That feels a little bit creepy. And certainly the Europeans are way ahead of the Americans in putting protections. I will offer a thought here, which is that as creepy as it is, I think that is a losing battle. And I wish it weren't the case, but I do not myself put a lot of time or worry into the surveillance society that is developing. And I say that simply because I think that the machines are getting smarter than we are, and they're going to figure out how to do that no matter how we resist that. And I want to be very clear, I'm not making an argument of advocacy. I'm just saying that when it's raining inside, the only thing you really can do is open an umbrella. You can't stop the rain. And I think that's where we are on this issue of the collection of personal data. This is an unpopular remark, and if I were advocating the loss of personal data, it would be a different thing. I'm not advocating. I'm just saying I don't think this is a fight we're going to win. But that's different from saying we're going to gobble up all of the output of Oxford University Press or the American Chemical Society. That's not personal data. Now, if I happen to go to a journal of the American Chemical Society and I start looking up things and I'm reading this article and I link to that article, and then I see somebody's name referenced and I look that individual up online to find out what the person's CV is and so forth, there is some system somewhere that is collecting my personal information as I do this. Why is Joe navigating in this particular way? Why is he suddenly interested in this particular aspect of material science? What can we say about him? That's the area of personal information, and that's where I think that the battle will be lost. That's very different from saying we're now going to look at all the content of the articles published by the American Chemical Society and convert them into an economically useful artificial intelligence. So I think we have to keep those two things separate. I don't know that the Europeans are ahead or behind us on this. I think that this is all so new that the rules are yet to be written. And in fact, I don't think we're in a position to write the rules because who knows where this is going. An interesting test would be to get the various AI companies to have their AIs come up with a draft of the rules. I wonder what the AIs would say.
Right. I don't know, but yeah, the use of material that is, published under copyright and, under a certain kind of expectation, to be just, used in such a different way. It's just mind-boggling to me that, people were sitting in a room and going like, I know what, we can just take all of the copyright protected work and make it our own, and without asking anybody permission or consent or paying them, just like, I don't know, what went on at that conversation. So, I think, as we, we've mentioned a couple of times the thing about, sort of the absence of not only recognition, but payment. But, do you think there is, any kind of a form that might develop that would change that? Is it going to be only in response to legal consequences, or what might disrupt this current pattern of we'll take your copyright protected work and make it our own without anything coming back to you?
Years ago I knew a kid who was a skinny little kid whose elder brother was absolutely huge. And the skinny kid once said to me, you don't really have to worry about going out on the playground when you got a brother like that. I remember laughing at that. His elder brother, basically would beat up anybody who picked on his kid brother. He was very tiny. And we who work in scholarly communications should be aware we have a big brother too, and it's called Hollywood. And Hollywood is out there, and boy, do they love a fight, and do they love their lawyers, and do they like to sue people, and do they like to make trouble, and are they very good at it? Hollywood is the number one, the U.S. film industry, I should say, is the number one film company in every country in the world that allows for their import. It is the most, outside of defense, it's the most dominant American industry that there is. They are the people who have done things like fight for copyright extensions, which, by the way, is something I'm personally, at best, ambivalent about. I'm not a big advocate of these, life plus 75-year copyrights. All these attempts to protect Mickey Mouse are a little bit extreme, in my view. But they are in a position to not only negotiate, but also to muscle companies like Google and Meta. They have access to people in politics. They are huge raisers of money in political campaigns. So it is a strong political force. So I think that a lot of the advocacy for copyright and the whole issue of being compensated is going to come from these high-profile entertainment industry executives who understand who butters their bread and how they're going to go about doing it. And now the good news there is, we have that big brother. We're not going to get pushed around on the playground. The bad news is that their interests and the interests of the scholarly community are not perfectly congruent.
Right.
The Disney Corporation might like the fact that you can protect Mickey Mouse for, I don't know how many, God knows how many decades. I think that the author of an article on biochemistry that gets published at the Public Library of Science might be a little bit less concerned than a Hollywood executive. And they also have different concerns. You mentioned the issue of the integrity of the work. If you're a scholar, what else do you have?
Right.
I mean, the idea that somebody could take a book you've written, an article you've written, and move it around and change the findings or change the nuance, or for that matter, fail to give you proper credit as the author, because although people might sign a Creative Commons license that that requires accreditation, providing credit, how are you going to chase them?
Right.
If Meta is hoovering up, there's something like 20 million books in print in English today. If they're hoovering up all of those books in some way, how are you ever going to find out what they took, what they copied? How are you going to come up with a compensation scheme for that? Yeah, we hoovered up 20 million books and you wrote one, so we're going to give you 0.00001 cents every I have no idea how that could possibly play out. But that's not a reason to say that the proprietary rights of the creator should not be respected. What is true is we have no idea what form that will take.
Right. I mean, you think, like, say, if you have a recording and it's played on the radio or it's played in a streaming service, you might argue that you're not paid enough, but you do get something, and there is a system in place for acknowledging. The radio station can't just say, well, gee, there's all this music out there, let's just lay it on the air. And they have to actually go through some process that will kind of work within whatever the distribution rights are for that particular piece of music. It just seems to me like surely there is a way. So one of the other points that all of these things I think are interrelated, but you mentioned in there about the kind of the weird twist in terms of open access. Now, Methodspace, the research community that I manage, we are intentionally open access. The whole impetus behind Methodspace is to create kind of a researcher to researcher community where, we can learn from one another. We have webinars, we have people from all over the globe who are there, with the idea that, we can share and learn and grow, and this is positive, and we can bring more people into the conversation because, academia has traditionally been very, elite, because not everyone can participate. But, we have emerging scholars from all over the world who, in a place like Methodspace, can have their voice heard and be a part of the conversation, and also to gain access to other people's writing. And certainly Sage has made a big commitment, and other scholarly publishers, to make entire journals open access. So to then think like, oh, well, we, the collective we, are willing to make a certain kind of sacrifice of potential income because we have this ideal of creating a better more robust scholarly conversation, but then somebody else is going to make a lot of money from this, while we're still, scrambling. So it makes me wonder, like, well, is there, should we stop being open access? Should we create some kind of entry parameters that will, allow, that work to be more protected? I don't know. What thoughts do you have about that?
I have been an open access skeptic from the beginning. That is not to say I'm opposed to open access, but I think that the benefits of open access, at least the proclaimed benefits, have been largely illusory. But that's in some respects a separate conversation from the one about compensation for intellectual property rights in artificial intelligence. The issue with open access to me is that it is not addressing what I think is the most important issue, which is the amount of time that readers and researchers actually have to read things and study things. So a friend of mine, Mike Shatskin, who is a very prominent consultant in the trade book business, told me recently that he has industry information that shows that in the 1980s, the total number of books in print in English was 500,000. And today, that number has now reached just over 20 million. So that's a 40 times increase in the number of books. I would ask you if your leisure reading time every day has increased by 40 times over your lifetime. I can tell you that my reading time seems to be under more and more pressure the more media come on board all the time. And the problem with open access to me from the beginning, and I still feel this today, is there's an assumption that there is this inexhaustible amount of attention out there. And I believe that attention is the scarce resource. And as a business person, one of the things I find myself saying to clients, I've said this dozens of times over the year, your most important asset is not is not things like your physical plant or printing press or well. It's not even your copyrights. It's not any of these kinds of things. The most important asset you have is your management time, because it's management time that allows you to tease value out of these various assets. What we have with open access is an assault on people's time, because we start to lower the barriers to entry, even though we do the very socially desirable thing of widening the gates to allow more people to participate. We haven't widened or deepened the resource on the other side of that. So my skepticism is essentially what will happen with this explosion of material which open access doesn't create but facilitates. We've always had too much to read, and open access makes a bad situation worse. That's I think the way to think about that. So how do we solve that problem? How do we address that problem? And I think the practical matter is going to be that more and more we're going to see the publications are created not for human consumption but for machine consumption, and the machines are going to then be sifting and filtering all this kinds of material and then summarizing it back to a smaller number of humans who are involved in the research community. I don't think that is why people got interested in open access to begin with. I think that the idea of creating a whole new level of machine mediation would have sounded a little bit dystopian, but that's where we are now. And I'm a practical person. I don't see any way of putting the genie back in the bottle there. But on the artificial intelligence side with that, you've got the interesting question of, do we know? I certainly don't know whether the quality of the content that is being ingested into these systems is sufficient to allow these machine intelligence to work effectively. Do the machines want better quality content? And what does it mean for something to be better quality if you're a machine as opposed to a human being? I mean, for example, I've done a lot of work for physicists over the years. I can't understand a word of any of these publications I worked on with them. That wasn't why they asked me to work with them. I've run other things to the table, I hope. Well, it's an interesting kind of a thing to ask, what makes a physics article a good article? I can't answer that question. I can look at all the surrounding things. I can say, Professor Jones liked this article, Professor Smith liked this article, but I can't make that judgment myself. I can say that, oh, we see that there are a whole number of articles leading up to this article. We can look at the tree of citations and start to make certain judgments. So you start to look at the metadata and the whole surrounding information around the article. But I can't judge the article. You need to be a physicist to do that. Well, are we enabling the physicists to make better judgments when what we're doing is lowering the barriers to entry to publication and increasing the number of publications that are out there? How is that helping somebody who does the kind of hard thinking that a physicist has to do? Now, the jury is out. Maybe the jury is going to come back in and say, Joe is dead wrong. More is better. Too much more is too much better. More and more and more is better and better and better. If that's the case, I stand corrected. But as of now, I remain skeptical that we're moving the ball forward by taking that position. And it is an open question to me whether the machines move the ball forward with content that is not carefully refined, edited, and developed. That remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, like just, listening to your description of that, I think about, like, say, because I'm a research methodologist, I might look at, I'm not typically interested in reading articles about physics because that's not my field either. But I look at research in all different kinds of fields that are where the discipline, the area of study is not in my background or my interests, but I'm interested in the how. So I would be skeptical that reading an AI summary of an article would pull, or even a whole journal or a body of articles would pull out the parts of it that would interest me. And so I think that all of this gets into how do we teach the next generation to when will it be valuable to use this kind of tool, and when do you really just need to do the work of doing it yourself, because that's where you're going to learn something. And where is it that there's a value in, say, understanding the researchers or the research team, where they're coming from, what is the experience of those people that informs their work, and how might that be different in a different setting? We've done a lot of work about indigenous research and research from other parts of the world where they just the whole view that they're taking is colored by where their experiences and their training. So I'm one that even if AI can summarize something like, yeah, I know that attention and time is a limited commodity. And I'm always appreciative that our Methodspace readers are coming to our site, and we try to keep our posts fairly short because they're not the length of a scholarly article, but to really convey something useful in whatever the content is. But that's kind of, I guess, another conversation in terms of like you say, like what's the quality going in, and is it going to pull out the piece, the kind of thing, and what about the fact of just discovery, where you're reading something and the light bulbs go off because it's not because somebody just gave you like the bullet points of like these are the important, this is the gist of it, like that's good enough.
There is
something that's
a
missed.
hard philosophical question under this conversation, sitting under this conversation, which I can only uh, point to in a kind of haphazard way, and I'm not in a position to pull it up, put it out on the whiteboard and take it apart. And that hard philosophical question is this. You and I are having a conversation, and we are making, so this is a meta remark, by the way. You and I are having a conversation, and we're making certain assumptions about what is valuable about scholarly discourse, what we're looking for, what should researchers be looking for, what do they in fact look for when we actually study the process and so forth. And the assumption we make then is that all these new things, artificial intelligence, data analysis and so forth, all of these things are tools to further those research aims, and that the kind of analysis that we have done historically is the same kind of analysis, and the kind of judgments we make are the same kinds of judgments. We're simply using new tools because we think the new tools will make us more efficient. They will allow us to see connections that we might have missed. They will allow us to do things at a speed that we could not even imagine doing by ourselves. But what if that's wrong? What if the standard of judgment, and by standard I don't mean higher or lower, good or bad. We're not talking about 5-star restaurant versus McDonald's here. I don't mean that kind of standard. What if the standard of judgment is anchored in our biology, our sociology, our culture? We are I almost said two Americans, but you from your accent, you could be Canadian as well as American. I don't know. I'm an American. But we are North Americans in any event. With our cultural assumptions of educated people in North America, that certainly differs from even kindred cultural groups, say Western Europe, as an example. Maybe the machines have their own idea what judgment is, what's important, what's of value. And maybe as they become increasingly integrated, as they insinuate themselves into our daily activity to a greater and greater extent, maybe they're going to modify what we do. Just as we see, in any major urban area in the country, we see every decade new ethnic foods come along. They don't throw out the old foods; they modify the old foods. We have different things. Our palate expands; it changes. And I think that this is a question that needs to be studied. It needs to be studied by people and by machines. And that is that are machines going to begin to not only assist in the research paradigm, but will it begin to evolve and alter the research paradigm? And if so, in what way?
Well, and who, going back to the point of, who is controlling that, because right now, the people who are controlling it are this just very smaller and smaller every year handful of very powerful companies who have only a profit motive. They're not social sector. They're not educational institutions. They're there to make money, and they're not going to make any bones about that. So, that becomes, I think, kind of a clash of values that perhaps, circles us back to the place that we started in terms of, the lack of kind of valuing of those creators who are spending, as you put it, and I could totally resonate with, evenings, weekends, you're thinking about it while you're in the shower, it's just you're working many more hours than anybody would pay you for in the best of circumstances to try to delve into the problem that drives your research and writing, so kind of the flagrant disregard for that in the models as they now stand. So that kind of, it just kind of brings you back to will we whether it's because of pressures from industries like the film industry and others that, where the writers have perhaps more clout than academic writers do, to push, for a different kind of model for how these things happen and how the decisions are made. And, I think that just kind of remains to be seen.
I agree. No, I agree. I would make this one comment. I personally am not disturbed by people or organizations making a lot of money. More power to them. Make it honestly and fairly. I'm not concerned about the profit motive. I'm concerned about the monopoly on
Right.
Profits. So I'm a little bit perhaps more on the side of business than some might be. But excesses in business are certainly not anything anybody wants. I think that, when you think about the research community, the part of the problem we've got is that the individual researcher, at least at the start of his or her career, has very little power. A person gets an undergraduate degree, applies to graduate school, maybe gets lucky and gets mentored by the right dissertation advisor, does a good dissertation, moves into the job market, postdoc or job market, gets affiliated with a research group, a laboratory, is now in a community of other researchers in that field. Well, there are a lot of different masters there. There's the requirements of undergraduate education. There is the good fortune of getting the proper mentorship in graduate school. There's the whole question of of a very, very tough job market where people really do get shunted into career-long postdoctoral assignments, which are not necessarily very satisfying. There are the pressures from the other people in the field. We want you to write this kind of thing. Your research doesn't really fit in, so you're not getting into our journal. And if you're not getting into our journal, it's going to be all the harder to get the faculty position that you want. So it just seemed to me that at every moment, until you get somebody who's broken through, until you get somebody who has a hit in the top 40 of the Billboard, record charts, until you become that person, I wouldn't say powerless, but you are always in an asymmetrical relationship with all the people and institutions around you. And then on top of that, here comes Facebook. I mean, it seems kind of cruel. It just seems kind of cruel. And who is sticking up for the individual? The institutions themselves are basically siding with their libraries and the open access movement for the most part. Or they don't want to get involved with the movement, or they're trying to stay away from the questions. Who is sticking up for that researcher?
Right.
And I just, it's a very tough situation for which there's no apparent course of action that could start to rebalance this somewhat.
Right. And yet, it seems to me that, we think about what we've gone through the last several years with the pandemic and all of the ramifications of that, and with all of the changing social norms and all of the cultural differences and the globalization and everything else, that we need more research, not less. We need to be raising up researchers, and we're giving them the support and recognition and opportunities to pursue that craft, because we need to understand the problems today. I often do, especially now that we can talk the way that we are here, guest visits into classrooms. And, I say to those students, there's no gap in the research for stupid research. There are real problems we need to understand, even if you're doing a small study. Look at, what you can contribute to, helping us to make things better. So I want to just, before we close, is there anything that you maybe thought about after you wrote that article that, or didn't, that got edited out, or anything else that you want to add?
No, the only thing I wondered about was with amusement. I was wondering if some of the comments that appeared on the blog
Mhm.
were themselves written by an AI. Because that's inevitably going to happen, right? I just saw in a newsletter last night, I saw something to the effect of AI is coming for your Social Security. I said, well, wait, what is this all about? Should old people be worried about this? And apparently, a lot of scammers are now coming up with new ways to try to swindle older people who are not necessarily in a position to be careful and analytic about a lot of things. And at some point, we all get old enough for that to be the case. It's just a question of when the switch gets turned in that direction. Well, the idea that AI is going to be assaulting us the way we get assaulted by junk mail and spam and so forth. When I check my snail mail every day, we're always filled with catalog for products that couldn't possibly want to purchase. Well, is this what AI is going to be? Is somebody going to come up with a machine that is able to simulate my good friend Donald, and it's going to send me an email, and I think it's going to be from my good friend Donald, and I'll be taken in by that to do what? If you're writing an article, will there be a comment written by an AI that is supportive in a way that doesn't really help you, or is critical in a way that's inaccurate? That's part of the situation we have, where we're kind of going through a forest of information and disinformation and misinformation. And it's like being surrounded by flies and mosquitoes. You find yourself swatting away all the time. Very distracting. I think that's part of our near-term future. And I do not myself have the brains to figure out a way around that beyond just to shout out loud. Do we realize the extent to which we are polluting our own environment and then asking ourselves to swim in it?
Well, on that cheerful note, I hope that this conversation spurs other dialogue for our viewers and their colleagues to think about what some of these questions mean for them. So thank you for taking the time to chat with me about this, and we'll just have to stay tuned and see what happens next.
Well, you're quite welcome. I enjoyed the chat. And by the way, I mean, despite all appearances, I am absolutely an optimist about everything. So, totally an optimist. That's a matter of temperament.
Mm. Well, we will hope for a better world one way or another. But I'll keep the faith for that the underdog scholars and scholarly writers still have value, and with whether they are appreciated by other people or not.
I'm with you on that. And let me just say my own closing remark is simply to invoke my beloved Samuel Johnson, who was commenting about what he thought about the success of people who have second marriages. And his comment was, it is the triumph of hope over experience.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
You take care, and pleasure.